You know, we all think we know the Nativity story. It's familiar, it's timeless, but what if we treated it less like a fable and more like a historical cold case? Today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're digging into the records, the culture, the context, to pinpoint exactly when and where all this really went down.
So right off the bat, we've got a huge question. Our entire modern calendar, the year you write on every form, is supposed to start from the birth of Christ. Year one, right? But what if? What if that starting point, the very foundation of how we measure time, is actually wrong? Well, get this. When historians and scholars actually crunch the numbers and look at the timelines, the answer they come up with is around 5 BC. Just let that sink in for a second. The story we're talking about, it actually begins about 5 years before the year our calendar is supposedly based on. And that one little detail changes everything.
Okay, so our first job here is to kind of recalibrate our own timeline. The calendar system we all use today, it has a small but pretty significant miscalculation baked right into it. So to find the real starting point for this story, we have to rewind a few years before what we think of as year one.
All right, before we jump into the main events, let's paint a picture of the world at that time. Because the historical setting here isn't just background noise, it's absolutely essential for understanding why these events had such a massive impact. For 400 years, think about that, for centuries after the last prophet Malachi spoke, there was nothing, silence. For the people of Israel, it must have felt like the line to heaven had been cut. This huge, long silence created this deep, collective feeling of waiting, of anticipation, a real hunger for something to break through.
And who was running the show back then? Not a Jewish king from the line of Judah, which prophecy said would be the case. Nope, it was Herod, an Edomite. And for the people living there, this was a massive deal. Having an outsider on the throne was this constant, daily reminder that things weren't right, that the promised time just had to be getting close. And it's right into this tense, quiet, waiting world that our story finally begins. And it doesn't start in some forgotten corner. It starts in the most official, most sacred, most public place you could possibly imagine, the Great Temple in Jerusalem. This is Zechariah's story. And this is where it gets fascinatingly specific. The text gives us these incredible, precise details. The location, Solomon's Temple. The time, 6 BC. The person, a priest, Zechariah. But it goes even deeper. He wasn't just any priest. He was from the division of Abijah. That's the 8th of 24 specific priestly groups. It was his turn, his time, to go into the holy place. And it's right there, at the very heart of the nation's faith, that an angel shows up with this unbelievable promise. He and his wife, Elizabeth, who couldn't have children, were going to have a son, and they were told to name him John, which means God is gracious. I mean, what a perfect name to shatter 400 years of silence. Okay, so now the story takes a sharp turn. The next big event happens in a totally different setting, to a totally different kind of person. We're leaving the big, grand capital city and heading way up north to a small, pretty much unknown town. And just look at this contrast, it's absolutely deliberate. The first big announcement happens at the center of power to an old, respected priest, and he responds with doubt. The second, and arguably much bigger announcement, happens in a simple home to a young, unknown girl, and she responds with faith. The story is clearly telling us something powerful with that comparison. And once again, the details we're given are laser-focused. The time is 5 BC, exactly 6 months after that first event in the temple. The location is Nazareth. The person is Mary, a teenage girl, probably only about 14 years old, and she's engaged to a local carpenter named Joseph, who, and this is important, happened to be from the royal line of King David. And there's this other detail that really grounds them in reality, Later, when they present their baby at the temple, the offering they give is a pair of pigeons. That was the specific offering the law allowed for people who were too poor to afford a lamb. So right away, we know these aren't wealthy, influential people. They're ordinary, humble folks. And of course, the promise to Mary. Well, this is the one that changes the world. She's going to have a son, and she's told to name him Jesus, or Yeshua in Hebrew. And that name literally means Savior. So you might be wondering, what's the point of all this? All these precise dates and places and names, and even priestly schedules. Why would the story be so obsessed with these specific, almost legalistic details? It's definitely not just for trivia night. Well, here's a piece of information that makes it all click into place. The name Jesus, or Yeshua, wasn't unique at all. Actually, it was super common.
The famous historian Josephus, who was writing back in the 1st century, mentions a bunch of other important guys from that same time period also named Jesus.
So you see what's happening here, right? All that specificity, it was basically a form of identification. When people talked about Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus son of Joseph and Mary, they were doing it for the same reason you and I use a last name or a hometown, to make it perfectly clear exactly which Jesus they were talking about.
And that's really the heart of it all. These details, 5 BC, Nazareth, the order of Abijah, the 2 pigeons, they aren't just random bits of color. They're historical signposts. They are deliberate markers of a testimony meant to anchor this incredible story in the solid ground of a real time and a real place.
So this leaves us with a final question to think about. The people who wrote these accounts, they clearly wanted them to be read as history, not as fairy tales. They were talking about real events that happened to real people. So the question for us is, how does knowing this, seeing all this historical precision, change the way you view the story?